This is the second segment from The Avatars by George William Russell, writing under the pen name A.E., reading by Josh Mitteldorf. The boy went on lightly, leaping from rock to rock, choosing always the high ridges for his path. He had delight in his airy leapings, like to that the soul feels when it wakes in dream, and is buoyed on air and exults because the vast dragging of earth no more ties its feet to heath or stone, and it can, though wingless, wander at its will like a bird. And fancy this tireless child thought of leaping from crest to crest of the long blue waves of hills. Why could he not do it? He imagined the run and the mad gatherings of power for the leap, and in the very act of imagining, he had left the body behind. What had happened? The air in which he floated was vibrant with timeless melody, a sound as beautiful and universal as the light. Where was he? Earth was vanishing, swallowed up in a brightness fiery as the sun, and mountains, crags, and vales were fading from vision as if consumed by the ecstasy of the fire. A moment more, and he would have passed from the illusion of boyhood. He was reaching up to some immeasurable power, which was himself when consciousness faded. When it awoke again, he heard voices speaking above him. It is time to awaken him. The seer cannot be held to the eyes. The being cannot be tied to the body. He looked up. He saw a figure thrice the height of mortals, a body gleaming as if made of golden and silver airs. It was winged with flame above the brows. The eyes which looked on him were still as if they had gazed only on eternities, and the boy cried and knew not why he uttered the words, "I know you, shepherd of the starry flocks. What soul do you now draw from the abyss?" There were others, a high companionship, but he saw only for an instant a light of calm and lordly faces, and the next instant he was standing on the mountain grass, his limbs still bent for the leap he had imagined. He shook his ruddy curls in perplexity as he looked about him. The air was still and empty of sound or light, save the light from the far fire on the sky, and it seemed a grey twilight to the light which had vanished. "The sun is dark today," he said to himself. He felt a chill, which was spiritual, such as one might feel who is solitary on a lost planet. He flung himself on the heather, and with face buried in his arms, shutting out the world, he began to think about himself. He lay there for hours, and when he rose to journey homewards, the setting sun was reddening the battlement of the rocks, and the valleys were brimming up with purple shadow. He walked on and on over the ridges, and at last came to a cottage in the mountainside. As he entered he flung off the sadness which had beset him, and spoke sweetly to the elders he called grandfather and grandmother. He ate the porridge and milk the old woman gave him, and talked about the sea and the artist who was painting the mountain, but did not speak of the shining figure he had called the shepherd of the starry flocks. He knew, though he was loved, that they looked doubtfully at times upon this child of their child, and that they wondered often if he was indeed a changeling, as the people of the hills said of him. He knew this, for he could see their thoughts as he could feel their love. He went out after that and ran about the fields with the other children, racing and shouting with them, until the voices from distant cottages began to call them home. And he too went back to the cottage where he lived, and climbing a ladder, went into a little room where his bed lay close to a window, looking across the valley and lake. Beyond that was the same great mountain which he had watched with the artist in the morning. He took up a fiddle which lay on a box, and he began in the dark to play a melody of his own imagining. In the room below, the old man, drowsing by a turf fire, heard the music and its awakened long sleeping emotions. His heart was melted as when he was young, and he sat with wet eyes, listening until the music ceased, and there came a creaking which showed the boy had climbed into his bed. It may have been an hour, or hours may have passed. Aud sat up in his bed. He looked through the open window. He saw the great mountain beyond the dark valley and the lake, but now it was crested with a glowing light like that he had seen in Paul's imagination. The boy's eyes were starry in the dark. The light beckoned him to it. He must go. In a moment he was out in the night and he was hastening down in the valley. He felt tireless and full of power, as if he had not already roamed for many miles. The rocks glimmered grayly in the summer night. He leaped them more lightly than he had leaped them in the dawn. Then he left the rocky fields behind and entered the black woods, silvered here and there by flakes of moon fire. His feet moved as surely through the mazes of the blackness as through the light, and at last he came to the reed-fringed margin of the lake. He thought he saw silvery forms looking at him from the water, but heeded them not. He strode along swiftly by the lake to its eastern shore, where he turned and entered anew the blackness of the woods which covered the mountain to its knees. The boy climbed upwards. He felt the huge mountain to be living. It poured its strength into him. There was a vibration in the air, like the melody of the ether which had sounded on his ear. But now it grew until the mountain seemed mad with song. As he climbed from the last trees, he saw far above him the light brightening on the highest plateau, and he ran up the steep side in his eagerness lest it might fade before he came. There were voices mingling with the music, voices ethereal and divinely gentle, yet with all the power of that great tone out of which they rose. As he overcame the last steep rock and stood on the turf of the plateau, his eyes were dazzled, for there rose into the blue night a mighty and many-colored palace, its pillars, walls, and towers all luminous opal, inwrought with precious fires, and carven over with mythic forms. From the great gate came a blinding light, but the boy, unterrified, passed through it, and he was in the lofty hall, and through a light intense but clear, he saw many immortals, shining as that figure he had beheld in his dream, but beyond his dream, in majesty, each on their thrones with calm faces turned toward him. As the child strode into the hall, the immortals from their thrones descended, stood with bowed heads, for the child who was there was one of themselves, one who had left the imperishable light, laying aside scepter and diadem, and had narrowed himself to that body that he might waken the souls in the abyss of earth. At that moment Aud was divesting of the childhood in which he had imagined himself, and he towered up to a consciousness unimaginable and not to be fully remembered by his mortality, for it enveloped earth and heaven. He was struggling when he wakened at dawn in his room to recapture a lost magnificence of power. Had he been singing a song which went in every direction and into thousands of hearts? Had he blown shining images into myriads of darkened souls? Had he taken these from eternity to scatter the fiery seed through humanity? Or was the fiery seed already sown, and did he but blow it to a vivid flame? The child mind was bewildered, and it was long before Aud came to a surety about himself, for even the immortals, when they put on mortality, are but a little part of themselves, a spark in the immensity of their own fiery being. Chapter 7. Men are never nearer to the gods or more partakers of their ecstasy than when they are creators. Paul, incessantly creative, was the happiest of men. Seated in a glade of the forest, he could see the branches, green-burdened and wind-swayed, make fire and darkness to reel to and fro on the russet floor. He watched the flying of tattered flames and purple shadow, and the mad dance of color evoked whirling figures, which rushed out of the house of the soul to mix with the reeling light. He could see swirling draperies, flushed faces, loosened and rippling hair, the glint of a white arm, a gleaming neck, the dance of lovely feet. all sun-flecked, dazzling, and bewildering as the anarchy of flame and darkness in which they rioted. His heart was singing as his brush moved swiftly. If we were many-armed as an Indian god, he thought, one might keep pace with imagination, but that phantasmal figures went on dancing, being gay of themselves with a life of their own, and they would not be stayed in any lone movement, however beautiful. He pretended unhappiness, but all the while was delighted at his own swift mastery in evolving rhythm from chaos. So swiftly did his brush move that he surprised his hand, shaping form ere an image had become present to consciousness, and suddenly he knew that the demon which had let loose the whirling figures had also liberated energies which played on the strings of the body, directing hand and mind, and if the mind wavered for a moment, the guidance of the hand was sure. For an instant he rose above himself and became one with that creative genius which is behind all conscious motion of the mind. He felt in that instant his being was rooted in some paradise of fiery and beautiful forms, ready to rush out through any open door to populate the earth with ecstatic life. Where did it all come from? Had there been a dance like that in some forest of antiquity, with only the eternal mind to remember its beauty? And was it from that treasure house the flock of images escaped? He went on painting, intoxicated with the beauty he saw and the beauty he imagined. The forest depths before him were a dazzle of green and starry scintillations. Branches were suddenly burnished with vivid colors as suddenly vanishing. Patches of orange flame awoke, blazed on the russet floor, then darkened to purple. There was incessant birth and death of light. Through it all went the dance of lovely shapes. Then into the figures of imagination a living figure raced, a girl running down the glade, the sunlight on her blue dress flecking it with a gold rich as the bloom on a peacock's tail. It was Connar's child. She slipped behind him to look at the picture. "Oh, Paul, how lovely! I want to dance! I want to dance!" And she went whirling about, face flickering, hair and dress fretted with light like the figures of his dream. At last she flung herself down on the moss beside him. "Why isn't Alfie here to dance with me? She is like a daffodil in the sun, all burning." "Oh, who is this wonderful Alfie?" "Alfie? The mountain, the lake, and the woods as far as you can see are hers. I call her the princess because, though she is only my age, everyone has to be her servant. Must an old woman of 12 even be her slave?" "Oh, Paul, I can't help it. I think she gets inside me and I can run in and out of me as if I was a cave. She sets me on fire. She keeps you to do her mischief for her, as another young person keeps me." "No, it is not like that," said the child mysteriously. "She is like someone in the fairy tales. I never told anybody but you. I hear music inside the rocks when she is with me. Sometimes there are people like twinkling mists who come out of the mountain to look at her, and tall silvery people grow from the trees, gleaming people with long purple hair. I was frightened when I saw them." But Alfie laughed and clapped her hands, and they all faded back into the trees. "You and your Alfie are living in fairyland now, sweetheart. And to think they're sending you both out of fairyland to Europe, where never a dryad has been seen for thousands of years. Why are they doing it?" "Father and Mother think I ought to learn languages where they are spoken." "Oh, Olive dear, don't let them take all this fairy out of your mind. If you do, the hills, when you come back, will be only rocks empty of music, and the bark door of the trees will be shut so that not a dryad can slip through to play with you." "Oh, it is cruel of you even to think that. Why should I grow out of seeing things any more than you?" She sat looking at him reproachfully. The child's lovely face, a pure oval, the eyes a rich gray with a spark of silver, like a little star dancing in each, the fair hair falling in curves and clusters, and all of such beauty that Paul, gazing on her, lapsed into one of those mystical moods which what was beautiful more and more evoked in him. And she was no longer Conaire's child, but a fragile, exquisite imagination of the master of all arts, who dreamed and devised it within and without, and held it together, face, eyes, innumerable hair, heart beating adorably, breathing body, grace of limb, through every motion, speaking through it to him, evolving it until it became the perfect mirror of the immortal thought in the immortal mind, and could be a dwelling place for the gentleness in that majesty. He murmured in his heart over this little citizen of the mystic empire, "Oh, if you should ever become an exile!" And a wild protest burned in him because the great artist seemed to set out his masterpieces carelessly and without defense, so that miracles of beauty might be marred and the lamp set within them be dimmed. And then something within him cried, "No, no, the master never fails in his art. Through life and through death to life again, he follows his work, and he will not cease until he has fashioned an immortal substance what was but evanescent air." He shook off his sadness and said gaily, "No, you will never be out of hail of fairyland, never. Yet it is tragic, this going away tomorrow. But I'll steal you all for myself now, and we will row on the lake and come to our own enchanted island and light a fire there and signal to the stars when they come out, and I'll have a whole afternoon of my dearest to remember when she is away." He had been folding easel, gathering up brushes, paints, and canvas, and with the child moving happily beside him, he walked down the glade and crossed a rushy field to a wooded promontory running out into the lake. His own cottage was there, built a little way from the trees. He cried to his elderly housekeeper, "Margaret, I want tea and a kettle full of water and a boatload of cakes, for we are going to be wrecked on a desert island, and the earth will have to race 1,000,000 miles from where it is before we get back." He rowed out leisurely into the haze of sunny mist which lay on the lake, half rowing, half drifting, to a wooded island from which great branches stretched far out, sheltering lustrous shallows and inlets. It was a place in which he often sought solitude, and the mood of the earth became life for him as he rested there. And the vision of the earth was speech, and no other speech was needed. They lay on the mosses, sometimes watching through half-closed eyes the roof of sunlit leaves, quivering as if millions of emerald, blue, and yellow birds were fluttering above, sometimes watching the diamond dance of lights on the water. The lake, as long afternoon ended, was burnished with gold that melted to every iridescence. Paul, with a half sigh, woke out of his dream, and then there was a bustle for fallen branches. The fire was lit, the kettle was boiled, the feast was spread. He invented many fantasies for their common delight. The isle became movable as the carpet of the magicians of Arabia, and he brought it to eastern seas, or planted it as an oasis beside the ruins of great cities. And they had imaginary adventures with dusky races, and both agreed that when they died the island must go with them to paradise. At last, looking through the leaves, Paul saw the evening star sparkling above the cliffs, and he said sadly, "Our day is over." They went to the boat, and he rowed it back silently to the shore. The child stood looking at him when they landed. He saw her eyes were wet. She took his hand, pressed it to her wet cheek, and then ran away as if she could not bear a longer parting. He followed the little figure with his eyes until it was swallowed up in the darkening twilight. Over the hills, the stars were moving in the paths appointed to them, and it seemed that she, no less than the other stars, was guided on her way by the Great Shepherd. Chapter 8. "How great a hollow in life can be made by the absence of a very small person," said Conaire, unhappily. He had come to Paul's cottage a month or two later. He moved restlessly about the room. The flame of a candle is a minute thing, but when it goes out, what a great darkness there is. Why did you let Olive go so far away? Asked Paul. Truly, I do not know. I think some magic constrained me. There is a young girl, a little older than Olive, who a great lady, for hers are the forests, lakes, and mountains all about us. When she first saw Olive some years ago, she took possession of her as a young queen might. And Olive seems to belong to her more truly than to me or her mother. She is a beautiful quivering fire, this young Alfie. When I wanted Olive to remain here, she blazed at me. I felt as if an indignant goddess was shriveling me with lightning, and I was like some old half-wit who had halted a procession of princes. They have gone to a very rare and distinguished school. I could not myself afford this for Olive, but the guardians of that young Alfie, who ought rather to be called her slaves, for they are obedient to her whims as the genie to Aladdin's lamp. When told she would not move unless Olive went with her, in their lordly way insisted that payment was their duty as they existed only for the happiness of their young despot. Do you know, Paul, if your vision of the warriors of heaven had been about a great house and not a cottage, I might have thought the avatar to come was a goddess, and that this wonder child was she. Well, while Olive is away, I must try to find other lights to illuminate my darkness. Let us talk of that child we imagine as Avatar. The thought of him is often in my mind. He's often in my mind, said Paul. Come, I will show you something. And he left the cottage and walked through the woods until he came to a glade where was his studio, a building of wood all white with white pillars about it like a Greek temple. Conaire followed him within. The artist took two pictures and a drawing in colored chalks, and set them side by side on a ledge. The first was that cottage aureoled in light with its divine guardians holding their swords of wavering flame. The second was that dark mountain he had painted with its dragon crest of fire. The third was a pastel of the head of the boy who had been with him on the hill. It was a face full of light, a blue sky behind the head, making the gold of his hair like curling flames. These three, he said, have come, I hardly know why, to be connected in my mind. He told Conaire about the boy who spoke to him for so few moments, asked lightly, leaping up the hill. Conaire's eyes lit with excitement. Did you never think to trace the boy? Well, I did indeed, for his image had begun more and more to glow in my imagination. But when I thought of seeking him out in the countryside to which I was going, I felt as if a constraining will was laid upon mine, and I was not to unveil the mystery of that boy. In his own time he will reveal himself, and he is not to be revealed by another. Oh, I have thought about him, and he hesitated a moment, as if he was half ashamed to be so impressed by the transient vision of a peasant boy. I had a dream, in which he came to a palace of the gods, and they stood bowed before him. I do not know why it is, but the image of that boy darkens everything else in my imagination. And that dark flame-fringed mountain? Asked his friend. What are your thoughts about that? I do not know what I think. I hardly felt it was my own fingers guided the brush, and it has haunted me ever since. That mountain. I look at it as some ancient might have looked at Mount Olympus, or fabulous Meru. I imagine a gate to the secret of the world in its heart. I find myself thinking of what may be hidden in it before I sleep, and when I waken sometimes I have the sense that I have been there with shining companions. Then the elder began to conjure up out of memory or fantastic imagination a mysterious wisdom about the earth and its sacred places. To the ancients, he said, earth was a living being. We who walk upon it know no more of the magnificence within it than a gnat lighting on the head of Dante might know of the furnace of passion and imagination beneath. Not only was earth a living being having soul and spirit as well as body, but it was a household wherein were god folks as well as the whole tribe of elemental or fairy lives. The soul of earth is our lost Eden. This was the Ildathot, or many-colored land of our ancestors, of which Socrates spoke too, saying earth was not at all what the geographers supposed it to be, and there was a divine earth, superior to this, with temples where the gods do truly dwell. Our souls put on the coats of skin, that is, they were lost in our bodies here, and at last we fell together outside the divine circle and came to live on surfaces, not even dreaming that within the earth is a spirit which towers up within itself from clay and rock to the infinite glory. Only the poets and mystics have still some vision of this lost Eden. The gods are still in the divine household, and the radiance over the palaces of light appear at times to seers like yourself as dragon crests of flame, or rivers of light running out to the stars. It is time for us to be traveling inward, and if there be an avatar to come, he may show us the way once more as did the avatars of the past. How do I know all this? The Earth Spirit has been talking to me ever since I came here, telling me the meanings of all I have read and many things which never were written, and it confirmed that dream I told you about, that there would come a day when the immortals once more would walk among us and be visible heroes to us. Paul looked affectionately at his old friend to whom the universe was such a romance, and he would have asked a question which he knew would have started Conaire on a monologue of an hour, when there was the sound of a footstep behind him. He turned and saw a slight figure with a beautiful elfish face, who walked as if his body was charged with energy. It was another friend, Phelim Carew, the poet, who began at once with a tempest of friendly denunciation. "I have found you at last, you who denounced the money kings for their monstrous greed. But their sin was innocence compared with yours. They only kept money for themselves, a thing which is not worth keeping. I do not grudge it to them any more than I grudge straws and feathers to a madman. But you discovered here a world of unfallen beauty, beauty for which we starved, and you kept the beauty to yourself. I am going to write an epic like Dante and put you in the lowest hell, face to face with Satan's masterpiece of ugliness. It will be a punishment for your silent greed in keeping to yourself the loveliest country on earth. Is it any wonder you paint pictures which people fall over each other to possess, when you have not even to exercise imagination? You have only to pick up the loveliness which lies all about you, while we have to sweat blood to make a thing of beauty. Oh, but that is wonderful." His quick eyes had been roaming about while he talked, and he had seen the aureoled cottage with its divine watchers. "You must tell me about that. It is you who have become a poet, but I have broken in between you and your friend." "Oh, no," said Conaire, "you only continue what we were speaking of. The mystery and the magnificence of this mountainous nature. Earth, I see, has accepted you, for she inspires you to continue our conversation." He looked with great friendliness on the newcomer. Each had heard the artist speak of the other, and they at once slipped into what seemed an old intimacy. "I walked my way up here. I knew I had come into a country which was still in the divine keeping. I was on a hillside last evening, and I watched girls and children lighting a fire. And I swear to you, Paul, there was some master of their souls and bodies who lived within them all and made every motion rhythmical and beautiful, as if a greater than Phidias had invented the harmony of their movements with each other, with clouds, blown boughs, and the quivering waters of a stream. For 3 marvelous moments the invisible artist made masterpiece after masterpiece, and then, as if he had run to other souls to make another wonder, the rhythm was broken, and the children parted as leaves might fall from a withering blossom. Your eyes should have seen it. How could I put that visible magic into poetry? But you are not going to keep this enchanted land to yourself. I'll make it famous. No, I won't. You are right to be reticent. The earth will call to it all whom it thinks worthy. I am going to write better poetry than anyone, for I will wrestle with earth and will not let it go until it blesses me. Shall we initiate him into the mysteries? The artist asked Corner. Let him brood on the pictures, and if he is to be initiated, it will appear from his interpretation. The poet looked at the three pictures, and after a silence of some moments, he turned to the others. A divine child, a manger, heavenly garden, a holy mountain. He is accepted, said Corner, and the three talked late into the night. Chapter 9. The poet, who had neither dream nor vision to build on, was strangely the most earnest in faith that the darkness of earth was to be invaded from the heavens, and yet he would not have any search made for the Avatar. He will reveal himself in his own time, though as yet he may be only a boy. He may be doing his work. He may be like that Cuchulainn of the Irish hero tales, of whom it is said, "This man protects Ireland more when he sleeps than when he wakes." Do we know what happens when we sleep and pass beyond dream? We do not know what we do. We do not know what an Avatar may do when his body is still. He may narrow himself here into the being of a child, but is he narrowed in that other world beyond dream, the world of spirit waking? Your visions and imaginations, and the imaginations of others, may be fiery arrows shot by a being all light. I may be here because I am called. I think I am. I was for a year in that new world of marvelous cities. Nothing that the most fantastic imagination dreamed of Babylon or Nineveh comes near the reality of those gigantic, heaven-assailing cities. You stand in the heart of one and look up from the gloom of the street, and 1,000 feet or more above you the sunlight blazes on great towers and terraces. There may be a dazzle of flame where burnished plates of metal, silver or bronze, catch fire from the sun and burn like giant candles. There are tall towers, all a glitter of glass, and oh, the wonder at night! There are lights, faint as stars, on the topmost stories, and the stars themselves seem but the continuation of a fabulous architecture reaching up to infinity. These cities are the last trap set for the spirit of man to draw him from nature and from himself. The people who live in them are kind, but oh, so unhappy. They fly from one sensation to another, and the way from body to soul is lost. If they close their eyes, they are in darkness, which frightens them. They cannot bear to be still or alone. They are thirsty for beauty, but cannot create it within themselves. When they meet a soul, truly living, natural, and prodigal in itself, they are filled with wonder. They try to express their reverence by filling up every moment for it with the sensations which have atrophied their own imaginations. 90% of their people live in these unimaginable cities, which they began lifting to the clouds 300 years ago, when the race was in its childhood. They created out of an abundant physical energy a prodigious mechanism which goes on swelling out of its own inherent vitality, building and organizing until the mechanism has overwhelmed life itself. They cannot help themselves, poor people. They were born into the mechanistic maze and do not know the way out. There was never anything in the world so pitiful as their souls. They are rich inconceivably without, but paupers within, supplicating alms from any stray genius. They have become alien to nature, the ancient mother. In its silences and loneliness, they might meet the outcast majesty of spirit, and to the poor soul that outcast majesty would be a thing of terror. They would not recognize it as themselves. How could they be saved? If I was dictator, I would take them in hundreds of thousands and chain each one as a solitary to a stone in the desert or to a rock in the hills, give them a blanket or two and a little food. I would chain them to the rock as Prometheus was chained, and let the infinite heavens, sun, moon, stars, and wind be tormentors in their solitude until they had made friends with sky, sun, stars, moon, wind, and earth, and they found in the anger of the gods there was a love, until the silences became friendly, and the hollows of air no longer a void, the stones were sweet to the touch. I cast all my thoughts about this on the air to 100 million listeners, and then flew over here to know what you were doing. It is enchanted, this western land of yours, not for its mountains, not for lake, river, and heath, but because it seems alive. And, Paul, there are the strangest folk here, drawn, as I think I was and you were, by that mystic nature. I walked day after day and felt the mountains were swallowing me up. It is not the poet you knew who is here, but the earth spirit who sits and prattles by your hearth. Make the most of it while it is with me, for it may leave me, though I will never leave it, but will pursue it and cry to it as Jacob to the angel, I will not let you go until you bless me. Paul and Conaire sat listening, pleased by the fantasy of the poet, and as Paul looked at the elfish figure, it seemed to his imagination to be enveloped in a dark blue, shining air, transparent as the blue of night, and there seemed innumerable sparks flashing like gold in that dark purity of blueness. Even the ruins of humanity here, the poet went on, have some wild poetry in them. I was walking on a mountain road the day before yesterday, and an old man came along, the remains of a magnificent human being with a ruined beauty on his face. I imagined it there. It might be a palace of the Siddha, who were the old gods of our people. You may have heard of them. Old people speak of them, said the boy. I have not seen them, though they call me a changeling. Why do they call you that? Asked Paul. I will not do the things they wish me to do. I will not be made to learn like the others. I will not be shut out of the air. I run away. Do you not want to know what others know? Asked Paul. I know what they think, answered the boy. They have no light in their minds, unless I blow it into them. Then I can make them think what I will. What do you make them do? Asked Paul, amused at the young dictator whose years might number 12 or 14. He thought the boy might indeed move people to do anything by his beauty. I found an old woman listening to a music coming out of the hills. She was muttering to herself, they are singing there, they are dancing there tonight. And I tell you, Paul, I heard a faint tinkling come out of a ridge of rock, as of innumerable elf creatures playing on I don't know what musical instruments. Besides these folks whose minds have been shaped for centuries by the earth, they lived on. There are many refugees from cities, as you are, the masters of the world who organized production and found that wheat could be grown here and fruit there, and cattle fattened most economically in other places, left out of their calculations these mountainy places where there could be no cheap mass production. But neglecting these, they made it possible for rebels against the mechanical to live there, people who can, by the produce of 2 or 3 acres, feed themselves and escape slavery. There are odd groups of workers in arts and crafts, little colonies of earth lovers. There is a dark, fierce, fantastical man you must know. His name is Gregor. There is a sculptor and his wife I met. There are obscure mystics scattered about everywhere. I never met such adorable wild people. They all seem to have woven into them some tapestry of nature, and their being is shot through and through with threads of light. They are the nucleus of an army in conflict with the vast mechanism of the world. They are mobilizing the great silences, mountains, lakes, sun, and wind, things that have no hands to smite, making ready for the last battle between light and darkness. They will make themselves invincible by these gentle, eternal things, and by God they will win, even if the battle should last 10,000 years. This country of stones, the masters of the world neglected, it is there the temple of the future will be built. Paul and Conaire had the delight men have who listen to praise of their best beloved. Then the poet began again. I'm not going to leave this country. I will tramp about it until I find the place where earth is most friendly to me and will sing to me the most. I'm going to be lazy, he said, with a whimsical smile, and let the earth spirit make my songs for me as it makes your pictures for you. I saw lovely things of yours in the galleries, but his restless eyes had been looking about the studio. You keep the masterpieces for yourself. Yes, said Paul, all of a certain character I do keep. I do not like parting from them. They seem to belong to each other and throw a reflected light from picture to picture. Yes, I see that. It is a new realm of nature you are revealing. They connect with each other as we do. We are like planets drawn to circle about an invisible sun. The only thing of interest about us now is what reflected lights may shine on us from whatever divinity is to be the new lamp of the world.